Good morning, LinkedIn friends, HubSpot Nation, here for another episode of Let's Unbox on Tuesday, June 17th, 2025. We are unboxing the new OW Sync Orderwise connector with Daryl. How you doing, man?
Very well, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
It's been a long time coming, honestly. We got connected last year because I couldn't shut up about orders, and I still don't shut up about orders. And got your attention, and we're forever trying to give feedback to the HubSpot team about how to really, put orders in a place that we think it could be to solve a lot of industry issues. I was doing some research, or I was having Claude do some research. Let's be honest there, ahead of this episode, and something like $1 trillion, lost to just disconnected systems, right? Um, I'm wondering, before we dive in, I'd love for you to speak to that problem
Mm,
and what you see like on the ground related to that.
Yeah, a really classic example actually. Recently, we did scoping for a client in the UK, and we estimated £1 million of that client's revenue was being channeled into cost to manage processes that are not merged together. They're not linked up. It's all paper-based, or there is no process, and people are winging it. So I can fully understand how that is the case. I think most people underestimate the impact that poor process flow or disconnected systems has on an organization. Because you're in it and running it day to day, you don't always see the wood for the trees because you're almost blind to it.
How did we get here? Like the fact that there's such a disconnect between marketing and sales systems, and uh, you know, everybody calls it back office, right? Operations, but often we have our order management teams like working out of these systems, and they are some of the most important customer facing teams,
Yeah.
especially when you're thinking about customer lifetime value and recurring revenue situations, reordering. We have them stuck in these systems. Why why haven't we done better, you think?
It's a good question. I think I just recently, the amount of inquiries we've had to connect different systems together, this thought has come up a lot. And I don't know whether it's because society as a whole loves new toys, new shiny toys, new things. People get an inspiration. They say, hey, let's create it. It attracts new customers. But there's nobody saying, hang on, like, let's try and bring some kind of standard um, or unification of how systems are built, how they talk to each other. I think we're probably seeing a rise of it now with AI and AI being able to, MCP servers, that kind of thing, where the communication between systems becomes more standardized, but it still does feel very disconnected, very like haphazard, like something happens one day and something's launched, something comes out. And it feels like for developers or HubSpot partners or systems process engineers, we're like the people in the middle that are trying to patch everything together. Um, I don't know.
Yeah,
That's just my thought.
no, I think you're right. And definitely AI. I think this is one of those, like, people underestimate AI in general, but there's so many like derivative consequences and opportunities related to it. And I think this is one of them. It came up yesterday when I was talking to Stefan Lonkar about Shopify integration,
Mm,
and how he's getting more inquiries about data cleanup, right? And people are starting to understand at some level how important finally clean data is and connected data is in order to get AI to work for you, right? So just that push to leverage AI, like it's very hard. You can't avoid somebody talking about the benefits of AI. You probably can't avoid talking about the risks either,
mm,
but it's enough of a benefit to say, okay, maybe we should address, this thing that SaaS has been trying to tell us about for years, but in all honesty, SaaS has not executed well, because there's just been, in my opinion, unnecessary complexity,
Yeah.
which is something like MCP just like cuts right through that. But also what I'm finding is like the best practice consequences that have shown up, especially when it relates to QuickBooks and HubSpot integration, which really can be applied to like any accounting system
Mhm.
and any back office system, in my opinion, because they're all built not to manage people or relationships. They're built to manage money and margin and the bottom line.
Yep.
And since there's so many users of a system like QuickBooks, when we try to explain why you want to do some of that in HubSpot, it's like they can't even fathom the fact that you might have more than one contact associated to an organization, right? To the point
Yeah.
where, they send it to one and then they got this complex situation where it's forwarded to the other 10 people that have asked for the invoice. Meanwhile, in HubSpot, we can just easily associate contacts and manage all that. And that's something over the last year, like having to unravel that like best practice. Um, it's a mountain to climb,
Mhm.
right? Because you can't build through that mindset, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, HubSpot does make it easy to have the conversation. And it's so important to this framing of like, do you want unified view of customer, right? Almost all of them, any leader will say yes,
Yeah.
right? If we have that, well, your back end system does not have the marketing and sales stuff in it.
Yeah.
So impossible to see that. And guess what we're missing in HubSpot? Order data, like order history, some of the simplest things. And now we have that space. So I'm excited to dive in with you today. Are we ready? Are we ready to share your screen?
Yep. That's good. Let's go.
All righty. And something I mentioned to Daryl, and I hope everybody can keep in mind, like this is, yes, we're going to be showing stuff specific to Orderwise, but like the concepts that we're sharing is really available to anybody that wants to
Mm.
do order management and really post sales customer management, right? Beyond what we've seen in customer success, beyond the normal
100%.
SaaS situation that is just managing licenses and upgrades and stuff like this, right? So many companies have built, revenue paths and goals, I'll say, to like reorders and
Mhm.
cross-selling and
Mhm.
upselling and like it doesn't matter, physical software, everybody's got it. They all know they should be selling more,
Yeah.
but they don't have the systems in place to really highlight where the opportunities are. So
Mm.
just having this data in this space in HubSpot with the orders object, with various, custom objects, although the object library now, you probably
Mhm.
don't even need custom objects. For example, I rename services to deliverables in a
Yeah.
new implementation. And it's just the space is there. And once you have this space there, all of a sudden, you know, if you want the picture perfect view of a customer and all the things that they do with your business, you can have it.
Yeah. 100%. And to your point earlier about just before we dive in about the data management and data being really the critical part of this. This is really where this whole project stemmed from in connecting Orderwise. Not only from the client perspective where they were saying, look, hey, we want to integrate both systems because we want sales reps to see all of their order history and track that from within HubSpot, so we don't have to push them into their other ERP system. Sorry, Orderwise. But let's face it, the reps are working out of HubSpot on a regular basis. And no matter what system you're using, if you have to switch between systems all the time, you've got to remember two sets of logins, or if you've got single sign-on, you've got to wait to sign in. There's a bit of a disconnect, and then you've got to remember where you're going in the system. You might find incorrect data. People want it served on a plate in front of them in the places that they are most. And on top of that, the issues that we experienced as an agency helping people to integrate these systems was the issue with data. It is notorious for being, people say, yeah, we've got clean data, and then you go in and you get right, okay, so this is a different structure. Your data might be clean, but how do we make sure that we're actually mapping the correct information to the correct places? And when we were thinking about how do we standardize these types of connections to ERP systems, the critical piece was to allow the customer to be able to make changes to what they were syncing, what properties they were mapping, and how frequently that was coming across. Because one of the critical things, people say, yeah, we want a two-way sync between what we have in one system and the other. But what happens when you have bad data in one system and you've got good data in another system, it very quickly becomes polluted because you're passing the same information backwards and forwards. So we actually implemented it contrary to our first thoughts, but after a bit of analysis, we implemented one-way sync, and then the second sync back was through workflows, not like a lot of the data sync where everything just goes two-way. So that was fundamental to when we were building this. We went, actually, we need people to understand that you don't want to immediately pass things both ways. You need to set parameters and filters to say, when something happens, we can then allow something to pass if this criteria is met. And what was really difficult is to explain to people during that process. If we were building everything from scratch every time, it's going, well, how do we visually explain this? How do we show them, why something's critical? They just get the project done, why all the and then you deliver.
I'm very interested in understanding how you did that.
Yeah.
Right.
So
because often and this is why I as I came into the consulting space outside of, after being internal to industrial companies, 4 in a row, same kinds of things, didn't matter size, same kind of dysfunction across the data system. Right. And this idea of keep it simple, right, just didn't make sense to me. We're building complex systems here to support complex human behavior. I think this is one of the differences of why there's been so much advancement related to lean manufacturing and standardization there, but not on the marketing and sales side, because it's ones and zeros.
Right.
It's black and white. It's 1 + 1 = 2, like in operations. Usually it's very much not that, right? On the customer side, internally and externally, right? And, leaders are smart, right? They don't build successful businesses on accident, right? And some of the quickest paths I've had to buy-in are showing a very complex diagram and taking 15 minutes to run through it with a leader, because that's the only way they can understand how to resource these projects effectively, resource ownership and management of the system. And the example I love to bring up is for B2B order portals or any customer portals. One of the most common expectations should be if there's shipping involved, right? Tracking information.
Yeah.
Right. I want to log in to see tracking information. I want tracking information automatically sent to me. And usually when we don't have those portals, it's an order management person, a customer facing person sending the tracking information. Usually they're getting that information from somebody else that might be sending it to them via email. Right. And to be able to connect the dots between, if you want somebody to be able to log in to see a tracking ID, right? Up to this point, we're probably not even considering the change in process required in the shipping department to support that, right? And if we can't connect those dots, you put the CRM owner or whoever's in charge of the system, now they have to manage change in a department of the organization that they normally don't touch at all, right? And that's where we need leaders. We need to put leaders in a position to enact that change, right? And help people understand why it's needed. And it's a very small, big deal tracking ID. It's representative of the complexity required to solve for this. But once you get the people, they really want the portal, right? So once you can say, all right, unified view of customer in HubSpot, so that companies can access their information like Amazon, yeah, maybe we can do some work to help the person put the tracking ID here instead of over here, right?
Yeah. that change management is a big piece, and I think in the client that we went to see a couple of weeks ago, where we were doing the scoping, initially we knew there was challenges in the process, like from end to end in the business, and that's why we were there in the first place. But even some of the people that were helping us through that, talking about the processes, were initially skeptical of, do we have as big a problem as we think we do? And the more we pressed into like why something was done on a daily basis, or just even talking it through, and suddenly it was like light bulb moments. Why on earth are we doing that? Because we are spending a fortune. And it's just like, I'm just sitting, you're just sitting there just talking to people, and suddenly it dawns on them when they actually sit down. And by the end of 3 days, which was quite intensive, it was like, yeah, we're clear exactly why we've got a problem now. Like, we know we need to do this. And the comparison was, 500K for a new system.
Yeah.
So then you look at that and you go, well, okay, how much are you spending on excess shipping? How much are you spending on lost, like, soft cost, labor? And it quickly adds up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way to approach it with, well, certainly we found it successful with management and leadership, is to say, look, there's the opportunity cost. You could do nothing and you could run as you are, but you won't grow, or you'll feel the pain. The
Yeah.
flip side is we can actually save you that, for X amount, depending on what the project is. And here is how that process is going to be followed. And even though we've done scoping, there is always, I think you mentioned it early on in this conversation about scoping being a big part, or data mapping being a huge or a bigger part even than the build. And it's so true, because once you understand the system and you can say, well, we need to change these processes, that's cool. That's fairly quick to do. The previous step is actually the bigger part of the project, because you need to know the nuances of that business or that industry or that clientele, and then you need to be able to think through the different scenarios. So you've got to do a full process flow in your head, on paper, or wherever it is, either during the conversation or as part of that scoping, to do
Yeah.
all the what ifs. And sometimes that isn't always appreciated in by different people in the organization. So you then, as you say, you go into change management and you have to start educating people in the way that they understand.
Yeah.
So yeah,
At the beginning, we gotta try our best to get away from the where it should be done and the who should be doing it conversation, because it does start to get personal.
yeah,
Either the person owns it or they just really like these systems that they've been using and they know and they're comfortable, right? So as soon as
mm,
you start to suggest there's replacement or change, like that's why when we start with unified view of the customer, like these outcome statements,
mm,
right? We can immediately go to like, it's not about where, it's about how we get the data into HubSpot. Like we've
yeah,
agreed that we need the data here, right? And my favorite flip, and then we can dive in, is again, this comes back to best practices and where people have been doing things. If we've decided the unified view of the customer is in HubSpot, and HubSpot is a system designed to support like customer facing activity, why would we have customer facing teams not working from HubSpot? Which I know is a huge shift for most
yeah,
companies with ERPs in them, right? But as soon as you do that, and this is why I say like 95% of the work that I do on any project is data model and getting that strategy right.
mm,
Because once you can shift that, and now we're creating orders and invoices, which is, I know, heresy. We're creating them in HubSpot and then sending the data that the operational and accounting systems need
yeah,
with like customer IDs, because they really don't care about the relationship data at all, right? If anything, they complain about it getting in the way all the time, right? That creates these data model wins that all of a sudden builds and integrations get cut in half,
yeah,
right? It's just a long walk to get there, like
mm,
conversationally. But once you have everybody in the room and like you say, like you can get these light bulbs to trigger, it's the most common sense approach when you can break it down to our customer facing team needs the right set of tools if we're expecting to grow and scale,
mm,
right? And that's most of the time not working out of an ERP. The last thing, this has been a learning curve as I've come into the consulting space, and right. And I don't think there's any negative intent behind this, but really, as a user or a leader, it's been hard to find good support because everybody has quotas and goals and things. And when I talk to ERP, I had a specific ERP conversation where they brought me in to talk to the customer because they were using HubSpot.
Mhm.
First of all, they're like, HubSpot, this customer have, I don't even know how to define their ask. So just go talk to them. I talked to the customer and they're like, yeah, we just want our salespeople to be able to see order history in HubSpot. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. If they're doing repeats and like they want to understand, yeah,
Yeah.
obviously. So I go back to the ERP and say, yeah, pretty straightforward ask. And they don't want to have to log into the ERP. They want their sales team working out of HubSpot. And even though I prefaced like a good 5 minutes of the conversation with that, 15 minutes in, right? One of the technical minds, right? Because this is their comments, their version of common sense,
Mm.
because they're not on the front lines. They say, like, well, what if we just give them a license to log into the ERP? It's like, no. One, they don't want to pay for the extra license if they don't have to. Let's
Yeah.
be real. Two, they don't want to log into a separate system. And
Yeah.
so
It's a
many
whole.
times I've been in a meeting where there is expectations of a sales manager to report on something, and you come to find out that he hasn't had access or it hasn't been working for him for like
Yeah.
6 months,
Yeah. 100%.
right?
And that is, I think that is the disconnect, as you say, in the industry where people have quotas to meet. There's and no disrespect, really. There's a loss in the terms of the view of what the customer actually needs.
Yeah.
And I think coming into the HubSpot space, it has really opened my eyes because I came from a shipping boxes and packaging kind of industry, and it was about volume, shifting volume. This is a complete change. It's about what actually works for the customer. And to that end, we also have to be slightly agnostic as to what systems the customer actually needs. Because no matter what system you partner with, your solution might not be the answer that they need. And I do
Yeah.
stress that to people when we come into the conversation is, right, there are other solutions out there to connect HubSpot and Orderwise. I know what they are. We've trialed them. We've built them ourselves. In certain cases, we might use them. But there are a lot of use cases where this particular solution actually solves that problem, but change it around to any kind of integration, any kind of system. Just adding more user licenses to get somebody access to something doesn't. I mean, they've got to learn a whole new system.
Yeah.
They've got to if you think of it as in terms of a person, process, flow, they've got to open a new set of instructions when they go into that new system. You've got to retrain them. So there's time, there's soft costs. Should that person be doing that if that's not a productive part of their day job?
Yeah.
It's
That brings us back to another point. Like, and I'm thinking about like this is a live like revelation that I've had during this conversation. Like we keep hearing the stat like 30% of a salesperson's time is spent selling. Um, I'm starting to realize that that's a very SaaS specific stat.
mm,
And when you put that alongside like journeyman salespeople that have been very successful without using tools in a lot of cases, they're clearly not like they can't survive if only 30% of their time is spent selling.
mm,
So their number is way higher, and it's because they don't have to admin like data and systems. Obviously, you can't it's harder to grow and scale a business when everybody's
mm,
doing that. But it's interesting to think about because we're very nearly approaching the point, and this is where data capture is everything,
mhm.
and the more systems you put in front of some human to capture the data, the less you're going to get, the less clean it's going to be, and then
More
AI can't
fragmented.
support you, right? And we're nearing the point where when we talk about agentic workflows and all about this admin stuff, if the data is clear and the data model is understood and the agents can help you with that, we're nearing the point where salespeople can spend almost 100% of their time like selling, right? And that's scale, right? And if we approach it from that perspective, it's scale instead of replacement, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that is really key. People get worried that AI is going to take your job. Well, in certain instances it might, but actually, when you look at it, particularly in relation to sales, it's an enabler. It's like the invention of the calculator or the invention of the computer. It didn't actually, yes, it took over certain jobs, but those jobs were not time well spent. Humans had more purpose in life than doing those particular tasks now. So AI is taking the same route, maybe happening slightly faster than these other inventions did at the time, but
a little bit.
It's it's also a long road.
Yeah.
But I think, it's when you know how to use them and when to use them for those specific tasks is
Yeah.
when you get to that point of being able to scale and using it. So repetitive tasks, if you're doing something, or even not necessarily simple tasks, can be complex tasks. It's the possibilities are
There is opportunity
endless.
for
Yeah.
sure. All right. Well, let's show people how
Yep.
to complete the data picture.
Yeah. So this is obviously inside of HubSpot, and we are in the settings page for the app. And the reason I wanted to start here in particular is that this is really the nucleus of how the integration is handled. And it's more than just a data sync. There are other features with it, and we've got more planned for later in this year. But starting with the bit that often you spend the most time trying to scope out and then trying to build, we decided, right, let's start with what data goes where in both systems. And we started with data coming from Orderwise to HubSpot. So think of that as just being your ERP to your CRM. What data are you going to send? What properties are going to be key in that data passage? And how frequently do you want that to come across? And apart from, there's obviously other settings in here which we can talk about another time, but the key part is really the mapping of those objects and properties. And to back up a little bit in terms of what happens on Orderwise, with it being an ERP, there's loads and loads of data sets in there. There's your customers, contacts, sales orders, returns, purchase orders, etc. So basically everything you need for a business to run, including CRM. But the issue with the CRM side of it is that it's very transactional led. So it's around orders and it's around quotes, whereas HubSpot is around contacts and the interactions with those contacts, whether that's a customer or a supplier or an individual or a stakeholder.
Relationships.
Yeah. So what we had to do was to pick out the core pieces that we know that everybody wants to sync and the core pieces that actually make the rest of it work. And those three were predominantly customers, customer contacts, and product variants. So for Orderwise users out there, that's your customers, your contacts, and your variants. Inside of HubSpot, we call them companies, contacts, and products. So there's a little bit of similarity there. But obviously you can see the direction of flow is from Orderwise to HubSpot in this section. And it also tells us what the sync type is. Now, some of these are limitations with the Orderwise side of things. So we've built initially as a production, it's not perfection yet. We've built from the perspective of we're working with what we can, and then as they scale, we'll adapt and suit. We obviously have the interval, so how frequently you want to sync something. So we have two tiers at the moment, standard and advanced, but predominantly it's just showing you the scale of what we can do, whether it's just once a day, once an hour, every 5 minutes, etc. But even here, Chris, this is where it comes back to scoping. It's all very well to say, I want it synced every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But you also have to think about the volume of data. Like sometimes HubSpot just can't process that data in 5 minutes. So there's so many areas where you come across this and you go like, right, okay, we've got to think about another thing here. It's not just a question of pushing data in and out. And then the I was going to say the more juicy part of it is really where we've got all these properties and then the mappings. We have exclusion fields, so there's certain data you want to keep in your ERP. We can exclude those. We've got standard properties and required properties. So these are things that we know exist in both systems and that we must sync in order for it to work. And then we have the ability to map your properties from your ERP system into HubSpot. And then you're choosing the HubSpot properties. And then once you've chosen that, so for example, statement address to street address 3, and then we tick that, and that then goes into sync. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, it won't sync straight away without you doing a manual sync. So essentially, you would walk through this process of choosing your properties, choosing how frequently you want it to sync, choosing which one goes where, and then you go in as a second step to say, right now I want to start syncing them. Let's backfill that data and bring it into HubSpot. And we've got different tabs up here to reflect the Orderwise side of things. But we're basically bringing everything, or we have the capacity to bring everything from Orderwise that is relevant to any customer contact record that you can think of. So that's your finance details if you want to go that granular. That's your customer service related information and settings. Because the bit that we initially started off was let's just bring a subset of fields through. And then very quickly we realized that actually that limits the capacity of what HubSpot can do. If we could bring every property through, suddenly we can say, well, price books. Now we can talk about Quote Happily. That's a whole nother ballgame because we can set price books based on a property that comes from the ERP system, or that customer's on hold. So actually they're going to have to now be pro forma rather than their standard account terms. So all of these things had to be thought through, and it didn't come overnight either. It wasn't just like kind of a revelation because it was trial and error. Like suddenly we're going through this process flow. This customer now is now thinking like this.
Well, it's a mindset shift for most, because usually, especially if you're coming at this from the HubSpot side, and I need to know, like, this kind of ability to manage a mapping like this, especially with accounting and ERP systems, I haven't seen anything like it inside of HubSpot before. Usually you're having to go to the iPaaS system or the sync connecting tool and you got to log in over there. And that again, like doesn't follow HubSpot design. So it holds a lot back from an admin perspective. And you just try to like, just let me just be done with it. Let's make it minimum. I don't want to have to deal with it. And so that's where the mindset has been in terms of how to integrate these systems. And what you're describing is that we can actually come at this from a place of what do we need in HubSpot to achieve the goals. And once we decide that, now we can tell the ERP or whoever's helping with the integration exactly what data we need. And then they can help pick it out where it is, right?
100%.
So this is really, really cool to see how configurable this is inside of HubSpot. And it
Yeah,
looks like you
it's
guys are taking advantage of a lot of the newer app partner feature set that
yeah,
we've been talking about on the morning show for the past few months.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And to your point about the it is a mindset shift because when we were quite used to doing the iPaaS integrations and setting things up so it's kind of fixed. But the whole point is that your needs change sometimes on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And why should a customer be beholden to a developer or a provider to be making those changes in their own time when we could actually put the tools, albeit with a bit of training, in front of the client side so that they can make those changes when they need to. Um, yeah, and there definitely are improvements that we've got that we need to make and we're planning to make to the whole integration. And this is probably, this is out of public beta, so to speak. So it's there's loads of suggestions we've had from clients, even that we have at the moment, bigger screens, pop-out windows, etc., to see more data visibility. And you don't get some of those until you actually put it out into the marketplace and say, look, let's have some feedback of real-time use.
right.
But yeah, so that's the main page. Now we've obviously made some property mapping changes just now, and it's telling us at the top that we now need to do a manual sync before it will continue, because you're not going to backfill any of that data. It will just carry on from now and start filling in the properties, but you're going to then be left with that missing piece. And it's like, well, hey, why did my properties not update? Okay, well, now the system's going to tell you when there's data missing. Now we took one piece of feedback we took was that sometimes, it's only, maybe you've only had it connected for a short while, or you just want to pull back recent data. So we actually launched this little feature, which allows us just to pull the last X many hours, maybe since the last sync was run, or maybe if you've been doing development work and you've turned off the sync and you want to, map all these properties again. Well, now you can just pull through a subset of those records rather than the whole lot and wait,
That's
an
amazing.
hour. So if, for example, we said, like, let's take the last three hours, that will then run, and then it started processing 9 syncs in the background. Now I'll show you that bit in a minute. But that will now process in the background one by one. It will go through those and just backfill the data.
Man, that's huge, because so much work doesn't get done because we got to plan the system being down to do development work of any kind. And it's just that kind of flexibility. And I know, like, in the HubSpot ecosystem, we take that flexibility for granted.
Mhm.
Like, HubSpot is in it, like, one of the only companies where the flexibility we have around properties and, being able to manage inside of production,
Yeah, I
right?
was gonna say we can develop live. I mean,
Yeah, is not available like in other systems. Like I call it the difference between like an IT project mind and then there's HubSpot, right?
yeah.
Luckily, we are seeing, the sync to production, coming from the sandbox. There's a new beta out for
Yes,
that.
that's cool.
So we're getting there, but there's a reason HubSpot like hasn't really done that up to now. So very cool to see this flexibility.
And one thing I just wanted to point out as well is that a lot of APIs will send their IDs for certain records in the system, and that is the case with Orderwise as well. They'll use the IDs as ways to sync certain data or reference other tables. And this was a bit of a stumbling block when we first created this, because we were just getting numbers coming through, and we we're like, well, we actually want the text that should be coming through in their place. So we had to create something called value lists. And those basically will go to those separate tables through the API and pull in the data that should be showing against the customer record rather than just those IDs, because normally your ERP will handle all of that in the screen view. So what you're looking at is not necessarily one table, can actually be a full statement of script pulling from multiple places. So this allows us to do the same thing on the front end with HubSpot to populate the data. So for example, if we just click on it and go to value lists, it jumps to the second tab. And then you'll see here, we've now got things like stock location. This is pulled straight from the Orderwise instance that we have. And it's now telling us we only have one stock location. But as an example, let's try customer type. So there's a whole drop down of customer types that can be mapped. We've got users. So we've got a drop down of users that are in the system. So now we can populate them against an object like companies, for example. So if I just map this one, we can select the
And
object.
this ability to manage data, like almost transformation, has been such a problem, like, without it, because these systems do not speak the same language,
Yep.
right? And again, this is one of the powers of MCP coming. It kind of like just cuts right through that.
Yep.
But this is the challenge uh, of integration. And when I first came in, like, this whole concept of like you got to decide the single source of truth, and then whatever that system calls the thing, we need to call the thing in HubSpot. And it's like, no, then you just wreck HubSpot's data model, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and oftentimes the way the ERP does things, like when it comes up with this codex for every single field and drop down, where it's like we can't just put the person's name in there, like, and we might not be able to, but now we can bring that person's name over into HubSpot so that the context is there. And all these things, like so many decisions I've seen made in ERPs because we only have 8 characters to work with.
Yeah.
And it's like, should
Yeah.
that really be
Shorthand.
driving business decisions? Like, we're in
Yeah,
2025, folks.
exactly. And just before I jump onto the export definitions, the manual sync page is kind of the area I spoke about briefly about backfilling data inside of HubSpot and being able to pull that back. So we created a specific page, which we can also do live, which means you can cancel at any point safely without having to worry about stopping it in the back end or anything. But typically it will run in the background, so you don't have to, you can close your screen down and go home and it will churn in the background. But you can also do it as a test live and see that come through. And that way you can stop it halfway through if so you've got 30,000 companies you want to sync and you just want to do the first couple of hundred, then you can do it live and then cancel it and you'll see a few of those records pop through. And obviously we've got the extra objects now showing as well. So we've got orders, we've got line items. We haven't even got to orders yet. We'll get there quickly. Tickets, quotes, appointments, courses, listings, etc. So
Yes.
yeah, we
All
have
these are native objects, folks. If you haven't
built it
seen
out.
HubSpot lately, those are not custom objects. Those are all native.
They are indeed. And this is where, so different to the standard object section, which we've got titled here, we need to perhaps come up with a slightly different name, but the export definitions reflective in the Orderwise API, and it allows you to create your own SQL script that you can pull any data you want from Orderwise. And then this part of the integration allows you to put it anywhere in HubSpot. So if the API doesn't have what you're looking for, let's say, I don't know, maybe we want to pull a custom list of returns from Orderwise and we want to populate them into tickets or another object, we now get to write that in our ERP language, pull that through in whatever format the API pulls it through, and then this tool basically translates that into the format that HubSpot wants it and pushes it into any one of these objects. So the extra objects are really just a way of segregating the additional data objects that we now have, appointments, services, courses, and listings. And the orders and line items, tickets, and deals are obviously the more standard ones, the regular ones that get used.
Yep.
But very, very briefly, you would connect them, put in the definition and the name. Now, what I'd like to do is just remove one of these. I think we will remove this one. So we're just going to delete that definition. And I'm going to rebuild that just now live if you want.
Yeah.
So we have the listings. So what I'll do is I'll just grab the definition ID, which is 40. I'm going to call this work orders. And what we're aiming to do is to see data from Orderwise, which is live production schedule, bill of materials, if you will, depending on what your system calls it, to pull them through and for us to then be able to map that. Now, depending on how you pull your data, you may be in a situation where you can pull a status through and we can then use a workflow to map that status to a column. That's typically the easiest, quickest way to do it. But in certain ones of these objects, it actually requires a pipeline stage. So services is one that it's mandatory. Weirdly enough, it's not mandatory for the other objects, or maybe that's not weird, but
it's weird. It's weird.
yeah,
It's coming. Don't worry.
So it is one of those things where, if you're building it out right now, sometimes it doesn't need it, sometimes it does. So it kind of throws people a little bit, but that's why we're there to guide them. So when we preview the definition, okay, so it's returned an error. So this is why I said it would be good to try it live. I'm just going to check that report.
And you might be thinking to yourselves, why would we want work orders in HubSpot?
Yeah.
Well, these customer-facing teams that are often working out of ERPs are often responsible for some level of scheduling and understanding and setting expectations for shipping dates and lead times. And they need this kind of information to understand if that changes. And what we usually see is that somebody's having to call somebody else in the organization to notify them of changes in the process or confirmation. Like, salespeople that have to deal with this situation are always calling the back office
Mm.
teams.
Yep.
And it creates this dynamic actually where sometimes they will manage how many times they call because they don't want to use up all of their like conversation credits because
Yeah.
otherwise they would be. And it just has all this secondary effect on relationships inside the organization, our ability to keep the customer informed,
Yeah.
right? So bringing this data, again, we're just highlighting, we can put this data into HubSpot. And when we do, it enables a full management of the customer relationship. And not only customer relationships, supplier relationships, any human
Yeah.
being, right? Because people get surprised when I talk about supply chain stuff coming in.
Yeah.
Well,
It's true.
when supply chain changes and like lead times change, salespeople need to know that so that they can tell
If
customer. And
it
oftentimes it's too late and the customer is telling them that they haven't gotten the thing yet. And that's not where you want to be.
it's true. And for a supply-led business or for a supply-dependent business, it is absolutely critical to have visibility for the customer service teams. And as we talk about, early on in this conversation about moving from just being sales or just being marketing in HubSpot, if you're involving different areas of the business, you need to have that full visibility for people to be able to make decisions quickly from where they're at. Otherwise, you've got split systems, you get distractions, you get downtime. I mean, it's a common knowledge, but it takes around 20 minutes for you to get back into what you were doing once you've been distracted once. So how many times does a customer service person get distracted on a daily basis? If there was something that we could do to make that distraction much less and have stuff in one place, how much time could we save? And I don't know that there's an answer to it, but I think it's a really interesting um, part of when we do scoping is to go, well, if something was all in the same place, can you estimate how much time you would save? And very quickly people go, yeah, I know how much time I spend doing this, this, and this. Okay, great. Now let's chalk that up because that's an important metric. And the user then feels empowered to go, I'm going to take ownership for now making or being involved in this change. I want to see this through.
I will say, because I agree, but I will say that the time conversation uh, doesn't always land the way I think most people want it to, in terms
Mm,
of if people know, especially salespeople, if they know what the result's going to be, they will endure an immense amount of pain
yeah.
to get there. Right. And that's part of the reason they don't use all these systems and meeting links and all these things that are supposed to save them time. Is they don't know and they've got to learn it. And like they know the outcomes if they just type up a Word document and then send it via email and they
Yeah.
call it the person, right? They've been doing that for years. Similarly, back office wise, internally, so much communication happens verbally when people are in offices where the system is just like a record of what probably happened, but the real communication is happening, face to face. And one way I like to spin it, especially in the face of AI, like, because as soon as if people start to get it, like the data coming together is replacing manual data entry all over the place, which is the job of some people in organizations, especially when there's data coming from ERP to CRM or just going out to the sales team in some way, right?
Mm,
Getting people to think about what can you do instead, right? Like instead of time saved, like what like if you didn't have to do this, what would you be doing like instead? And
mhm.
we put customer facing teams in this place of manual data entry, and then we assign them that value, that their only value is like they don't have a skill set that we need. And I've seen this from leadership teams all the time, but they often have the best ideas on how to improve the customer experience,
Mm.
which is where you differentiate, in 2025.
Yeah.
And hearing ideas like, oh, we could send them like nice onboarding packages, like in low volume situations, or do XYZ to increase like the relationship value so that we we jump on buyer's remorse and we handle all these things that we know happens day to day, but we've never been able to make time for it. Right.
That's a very good point, very valid point. It sometimes isn't about the time element. And yeah, I know I'm guilty of falling into that myself. Like, okay, can we save time on it? But yeah, some good points there you make.
Yeah. Just some alternatives.
Yeah,
If you're talking to
absolutely.
the CFO and they're doing dollars and cents, they will definitely key in on time saved. But that's where it's like leadership versus people on the ground. They have a job to do, right? And they want it to be not necessarily easy, but just like predictable,
Yeah, and
right?
I think that's also where when you look at it from a system perspective and a user perspective, so people first, process, and then systems, the things that you can do inside the system to make even that side of things more like easier. Like, it's a simple thing, but recording somebody's birthday of when they first bought from you, right? That's might be a simple suggestion, but then you can say, well, actually, yeah, we can highlight in the system for you. So that comes around to HubSpot. Let's make that a really simple. It might be sending out an email, or it might be a reminder to say to the rep, hey, drop in, this on your way past when you go into XYZ company.
Yeah.
There is so much that you can do, and it's about involving that creativity or bringing it out, and then having somebody who's perhaps got a system mentality to say, well, actually, yeah, we can make that a reality. We can bring it to the fore.
Yeah.
Cool. So just quickly add this definition. So we've added it in, and that is now here under work orders. Tells us the ID. We've got the HubSpot object record, and now we need to go in and actually edit the mapping. So this is where we have to bring the Orderwise data and map it directly into HubSpot. So we have a work order ID. That will be great for the Orderwise ID. We've got last updated, which we haven't actually brought through as a time, but we'll just use the promised date and time for now. And then the listing name can be anything. So this is just the name for that particular record. In this case, I'm going to use the works order description, but maybe if you were writing the code yourself, you could do the works order number plus the description, and therefore it might make a little more sense. And then we've got property mapping. So what it's going to do in this section is the top section is going to list the required properties from HubSpot's perspective. And the second section is going to list all the data that you've brought through from Orderwise. And that then allows you to selectively say, okay, I need to now map this to specific sections in HubSpot.
Oh man, that makes it so much easier than it usually is.
So we can just put in, I'm just going to find some that we've actually got that I don't think the listings object's been set up a huge amount because we've still got all the
They
test
built it
information.
for real estate.
So let's see, variant description. Yeah, let's put this in hit address 1. So if we save those mappings, okay, and then in order to start the syncing, we then need to turn it on, although we still have to do a manual sync. So we can choose how frequently we want it to run. An hour is fine. We'd go to manual sync. It'll fetch the data. And then we just come down to work orders and we press sync. Now we've set it to run, you can only run it every 2 hours. That's partly because we don't know the data volume of what people are dealing with. So that allows enough scope and time for people to run that sync successfully or be able to make those changes and come back and do it again in 2 hours. So that is that side of it. Now we do also have the sync history section, and this will tell us whether we've been successful in syncing it or whether there's been any issue. Now, 5 successful objects come through for the listings, and we can obviously see the regular ones that are already running, customers. Obviously, we're not doing a huge amount of activity in this database, so you can see it's just mostly zeros, but you get the picture there. If there's an error, we will notify the user here that we've got the error, and then there'll also be an email goes to the person. At the moment, it's the person who installed the integration, but we're working on things in time to be able to make that selective, maybe based on a particular ownership of an area or department.
Yeah.
And then if we go into listings, which will open up in another tab, and I'll just quickly show you the company page as well. So the other aspect to all of this is that most people that are using HubSpot won't even see that end of what I've just showed you just now. That's all back end stuff. So they're going to see the fact that there's customers coming through or there's contacts and they're in sync with HubSpot. So if we just open this one for StackSpot, and I'm going to open it up in my other screen as well. So this is just a customer, and obviously you've got the postcode here over on the left hand side. Give me 2 seconds whilst I just open this one up. Now, we built this very simple app on the right hand side, which is just to refresh the data at the moment. There's more plans in terms of bringing reports through from Orderwise, being able to download PDFs, perhaps run price lists, etc. So some of the common tasks that people would do in the system, can we bring them through the API? If the answer is yes, then there's scope to actually do that in the UI extension. Now, if we had the contact sync enabled, we could also click to include contacts and it would refresh them at the same time. So that scenario came about as that people edited the contacts in the Orderwise side or something had been added and they were like, well, hey, I can't see this in HubSpot. So why is the disparity? Well, it may be because you've got it on a longer sync cycle.
Yep.
So if you then run this, it will pull the data through. So if
so great.
if I were just to make a quick change to that company postcode, for example, and
Yeah, because so much of that, I mean, that's where you can sell them on the hour or 2 hours. Like, here's what's needed automatically. But if you really need something right now, there is this ability to
yep,
hit a button, right? Because I've heard
100%.
teams like, I got to wait 5 minutes. It's
Yep.
like nobody wants to wait 5 minutes, right?
Exactly. You kind of want those changes, but there is also a risk as well at having it too fast, which is the other
Yep.
thing we came across. And I think we've noticed with HubSpot making the changes to the saving the record as you make changes, sometimes that has unintended consequences because something
Mhm.
isn't complete. So again, we do often advise clients, well, look, start with a longer cycle first. And then once you're confident that you know it's coming correctly, start to bring it down to somewhere you're comfortable. So if we just press refresh, a couple of seconds, there we go. And the data is now updated. So I just updated it to my location currently, and that's pulled through. And you probably didn't even see it because it happened that fast.
Right.
So
Any center column, center card, middle
not
column plans?
not yet. That's coming. That is
Okay.
coming yet. So there's a ton of stuff you could do.
Yeah.
Pretty much the world is your oyster. There's a lot
Right.
that we've thought about, and one of them is the ability to be able to check stock and pricing for that customer live in the center column, because your ERP holds all of that. So that's an API
Yes.
call.
Let's
So
talk
you could
about
go,
that after today's call.
yeah.
Very interested in that use case.
So yeah, it's there's a lot of that coming. In terms of the orders object, there's a lot more stuff which we're going to bring through on this one as well. There's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff
And
people can do standard, workflows to trigger when an order's
right.
raised, like customer
Yeah.
service to follow up.
And that's why we focus on just if we can get the data into HubSpot in HubSpot objects, now you access the whole HubSpot platform, right? And it's not about having to figure everything out. So much of iPass and other syncing to like they have to do so much outside of HubSpot. And when you talk to them, they don't have HubSpot knowledge.
Yeah,
So they're not in a position to say, yeah, you could do it like this in HubSpot, right? And that would make a lot more sense. And now it's easier to maintain. Like Operations Hub is super powerful. And what we're seeing here, this is what designed and built for HubSpot looks like, right? From an app perspective. And uh, let's hit one more thing before we have to wrap up.
cool. So just quickly on the data that's come through. So you obviously see there was some other data inside of this this object before we disconnected and reconnected it. But you'll see here we've got the 5 or 6 records that we synced coming straight through. So we mapped the name of the product to this address one just for reference. And you'll see here we've got the record source. And in this particular one, it's not mapped to a pipeline. So I just double checked on the actual pipeline stage, and it's not mapped to it, but you do have it. So we can enforce that with workflows. The one last thing which I will say is going back from HubSpot to Orderwise. So we've built out a series of connectors inside of HubSpot, which if we just add one here, we can then scroll down.
Yeah.
And this basically is where you can now decide what goes back into Orderwise. Customers, contacts, products, variants, sales orders. And with the sales order one in particular, you can actually, because in Orderwise, the sales order is actually the quote, the order, the credit, the paused order, etc. It's just a variable that changes depending on what you want it to be. So we can take an inquiry in HubSpot from a lead or whatever, a deal as it starts, comes through to quoting, take those line items, push them into Orderwise so you've got visibility in that. And then as soon as that goes to an order, it then pings back into HubSpot as an order. And if you wanted, you could mark that deal as closed won if it converts to an order.
Nice.
So we basically complete that cycle.
Powerful stuff here. I see some other unboxings in our future. There's a lot here to unpack. And I appreciate you guys doing the work to really understand what's possible in HubSpot so that we really can cross this gap that has been between back office systems and systems like HubSpot. Yeah, I think we'll have you back.
Thanks for being an inspiration.
Hey, it's my pleasure. We got a powerful platform here in front of us, and it's exciting to see people like yourself developing into it because there's a lot of opportunity to do things just better, right? So thanks so much for joining us today, Daryl.
No, thank you very much.
Awesome to see what you guys have been working on.
Let's do it again.
Until next time, folks, have an awesome Tuesday. Thanks, Daryl.
Thank you.